Alone, you go faster, but together, you go further. Hi there, this is Greg Venning, and welcome to the Questing Chiropractor podcast, where we help you to do what makes your heart sing so that you can structure your flow and find order in your life, so that you can change the world one person at a time with the power of chiropractic, and then you can enjoy the profits that come from that gorgeous activity that we get to do in practice. And today we're talking about the tricky art of delegation, the art of empowering others to go on this journey with us, that we can have more leverage, we can have more of an effect on the world as we join others with us. And this is really, really tricky for us as chiropractors. We end up mostly with super chiropractor syndrome, where we take everything on ourselves and we really don't trust people very much to do this practice of chiropractic with us. We give them minimal amounts of responsibility, where the opposite is true. If we can give people more responsibility, we can get better results. So today with Mark Postles, we are going to be talking about delegation. Now, Mark is the thought leader within chiropractic, a man who has transformed countless practices to higher levels of success and fulfillment, and a man who, in my observation, is a master of delegation. He has formed associations and teams and business partnerships and many other ways of creating leverage to help people around him. So we're going to be talking about creating alignment based on different philosophies that people bring to your team, about roles and responsibilities and how important that is to create within your team. We're going to be talking about the key performance activities that we measure rather than the key performance indicators. It's a really interesting distinction that he brings through. And then also about how we focus on systems rather than just focusing on people, especially when things are going wrong, and even more importantly, when things are going right. So listen to this one. It is an amazingly powerful conversation. Hang on. Welcome to the Questing Chiropractor podcast. We help you grow as visionary, vital, and capable chiropractors who are always on. We do things differently as we help to elegantly awaken your innate wisdom within. We help you create robust, predictable, and trustworthy practices that serve oceans of people and yet still have free time for yourselves and your families. We use neuroscience to deliver better business results so that you can get greater, deeper, and more effective impact in more ways. We are Questing Chiropractors, and this is our story. So welcome back to the Questing Chiropractor, and Mark Postles is with us again today. Hello, Mark.
Well, hello, Greg, and thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, this session we absolutely wanted to have you on because this is an area where, in my experience with you, I see you do so well in this area of really empowerment, of helping other people to play the game with us so that we can all benefit more and get more from the game and have more fulfillment and more fun and more success. And that is the game of delegation. And it's a place where, I don't know about you, Mark, but we've certainly seen that people, especially in the chiropractic world, when we run our practices, we often don't delegate very well, do we?
Correct. Yep. It's certainly an area that we are on a learning curve in.
Yeah. And so when we're not delegating well, we're often finding that we've got too much to do ourselves. We start saying a thing to ourselves of, if you want something done right, do it yourself. We find that if we do delegate, maybe the jobs don't come back to us the way we wanted them to. But there's always this dream on the other end of having this team that's working together, where you're handing off tasks. So they're doing the things that they do well and you're doing the things that you do well, so that your practice gets better, your practice members get better benefits, you see growth coming through, and you have some sense of harmony going on. So what is it that lies between the heartbreak of it not going well and the heartfulness of this picture of success? Like, what's happening in that gap?
Okay, so I would suggest that this interface between shared values or non-shared values, or expectations of shared values when they're not even existing by the recipient, is a problem, and it's a challenge. And from a neurological perspective, I would see this as a right brain function of, I can do it all. And as you said, it's just this idea that, as chiros particularly, we're like misfixers. We're there to make sure that it gets done, and it gets done really well. And we've got a vision in our mind, and we go to it, and we wanting to adjust micro adjustments all the way to make sure that the outcome gets met. Now, this is fine as long as we want to do it ourselves. So that is a trap, because we then say, okay, well, this person has to measure a certain level of my expectations or measure up to those before I'm willing to give them any roles, because roles mean responsibility. And there's a big difference there between giving out a role and allowing that person to be responsible for the role. So there's going to be measurements within that, and KP, well, eyes, yes, but more important, key performance actions, actions that a person will take to duplicate the role that's been bestowed upon them. And there's a few things that we need to unpack around that, because in this area of delegation, it comes assumed that the person understands or has a philosophy the same as the person who's giving the role, right? And that's really, when you think about it, is impossible. I mean, everyone does their philosophy differently. So the philosophies that we have and that we do is tested through our sense of reason, and that then goes into the role we play, and ultimately that is that's an expression of a belief. Right? A belief is a construct that we have about things. So a CA will have a certain belief about a simple thing, answering the phone. And the Cairo, who maybe has never answered the phone, but has a philosophical construct around, it's got to be dynamic, it's got to be present, it's got to be, cover all these bases. So that's the philosophical area of it. And then has to get tested through the Cairo's reason. So the Cairo will play it in their head and then give it over to the CA. Well, there's a big gap there, because the CA may have a very different philosophical construct. So this is where it's really important in the practice, to make sure that every single procedure has the reason for doing it, which is the purpose. Once we get a purpose, once we are familiar with the practice's purpose, and then we take that purpose on board in the given role, then we can make our reason match that. We can rationalize it and look at it and understand it and understand all the moving parts, and then duplicate the role. Now, the other, the caveat on this one is that, okay, you run those, you go back to the philosophy, have a discussion about the content of it, the reason of it, and then show the person the role, and then walk away. Well, yeah, you can do that, and that's one way of checking how well you communicate. If you're getting feedback around poor communication, it will come back to you pretty quick. But it's not the person's role or the CA's fault; it's yours. So then the expectations that we will have for ourselves isn't necessarily that is appropriate for another person to do the role that we can do. Right. So Nori Cannon, an amazing CA trainer in Australia for many years, said, if something's worth doing lousy, it's worth doing. It's in other words, don't bother about doing it well, just do it lousy, but do it. And that's a KPA. That's an action step that we then can monitor and work with. So often there's a pullback from doing activities that have been assigned as roles, because there's this feeling of distrust within the CA, because it's like, well, I don't know enough, I can't do it as well as he or she did, and therefore they're not wanting to engage in it. So they tend to pull back from it. And that's where you get lots of assignment of things, but there's no action that goes with it, because the person's not empowered to actually do it. So I think that a distinction needs to be made there too, between giving a person a role in terms of empowerment and abrogation of a responsibility that we may have that is not fully formed, and we're wanting someone else to do it for us. So I think it's really important that we have this interaction with a given role, so that we can have some reality around it. And that's the testing part of it. That's the reasoning.
Gotcha. So, okay. Yeah. So let's unpack some of this, and for our listeners, I want to really unpack with a really tangible example. And the first thing you spoke about there was shared values, and that's part of the philosophy. Now, there can be shared values, and ideally would be shared values at the level of the vision of your practice and your statement of purpose and your mission and your actual core values. And if that feels really big while you're listening to this, let's come down to an even smaller chunk, but no less important chunk of imagine something like recalls. If one of your CAs, your front desk team, is doing recalls, that's calling people who don't have future appointments booked. If the CA's frame is that they are bothering these people or this is a sales call, they will do it with a certain level of energy and they'll have a certain set of results. So that's their philosophy, is that it's a sales call. But if through our practice's purpose and lens, we can actually reframe it to actually, this is actually a care call. This is somebody who has agreed to a certain way forward based on certain outcomes driven by their values. And we notice they haven't followed through on it. And we're going through with curiosity to, first of all, find out if they're okay. Second, we'll find out if they're happy to continue on that. And if not, what needs to happen and what needs to change from that. That's an entirely different philosophy of that procedure. That's a different purpose to that procedure.
Yes, correct. I think, the values sit above philosophy, obviously, and we test our values and make sense of the world through those values, and that becomes our philosophical premise. So we have this premise that the world is in a certain way, and people are certain things and do certain things, and this is the behaviors you can expect, and so on. So there's a belief structure that follows the value that we take on board. And our philosophy is the story that we make about that. So it's like it's actually a left brain function of the right brain, if you like. It's a area of scrutiny and discernment. So within that, then that level of reason will mean that the application of that in the role is going to be different from every CA. So in other words, it is a personalized thing because every one of your CAs, you've got 3 or 4 CAs that interact with recalls, there's going to be a different why or a different philosophy that will ring true for each of them. Right? And so it's like what rings true for the chiro may be very different to what rings true for each of those other 3 people. So we have to notice what their equivalent is of the practice's philosophy and where it sort of stands out. For some, it may be like, I just don't want to see anyone suffering needlessly or longer than they have to. And I'm going to call them and make sure. There's another one maybe, well, when people make appointments, I expect them to keep the appointments. And I'm concerned if the person's not there because they may be in trouble. And so there are 2 very different reasons for calling that person. Another one who has probably more clinical applications, like, well, we're doing change over time here. We're doing repetition with a person. And if we miss a beat with that, they're going to get suboptimal care. I can't stand with, I cannot live with that, with it knowing that we're giving suboptimal care. So I'm going to be on the phone to call that person to find out, what's going on. Okay, because part of you is missing out on this amazing thing. So those are just different philosophical constructs based on different values in a role. So this is where it becomes really fun because we then, as say we're talking to principals or chiros, we then have to go to the position of saying, okay, where's this person coming from? What's his or her philosophy? And we gradually get to know that more and more. And so then we feed back to them in their model of the world. And they're like, oh, okay, fine. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't want them to suffer. So, I'll be on the phone. I'll make sure that I'll go around to their place if you like, and that becomes a different proposition and a different KPA and a different level of commitment that comes in there, and it enhances their belief. So this is actually increasing their belief in the efficacy of our products and services and ideas. So it's not just getting a job done; it's empowering someone to ascend in a way that with a bit of luck, if it's appropriate, they might end up as a chiropractor. So it's sort of giving this opportunity to really live it and see it through a lens of chiropractic.
Yeah, really living it. That comes through so strongly in this. And you can just hear the excitement in your voice when you're talking about how interesting it is to find out what perspective they're coming from. And this curiosity as a driver when we are working on our team is just so massively powerful, because we generally do it pretty well when it comes to our practice members. We're open, we're receptive, we're curious to what drives them, what values they have, what outcomes they have, so we can create a clinical strategy around their desired outcomes. But we tend not to do it within our team. We tend to kind of go into this business owner role, and I'll almost say the pseudo business owner role, where you go into this dictatorial thing. And this is where we're not coming from shared philosophy, which we've just covered, or shared values, which we've just covered. But then it comes to the next one that you spoke about, because I want to unpack what you touched on in the beginning, was the level of expectations that are then clearly given across and communicated. You also touched on trust, and I think there's two levels of trust for us to talk about with trust and expectations. Maybe is, first of all, trust from the principle that other people can do this, and I'm going to trust them to find their role in this. So that it's the trust and the expectations that they might not get it right perfect the first time, and that's okay. We can work on it over time. And second of all, the trust that I can actually help them through it. I don't think a lot of people who've gone through chiropractic college have much trust in their own ability to train other people over time to get there. And that forms this distrust, which causes a bit of prickliness, and then we hand it over with poor expectations. And when the poor expectation, the result of that comes back to us and it hasn't been done well, we go, I knew I shouldn't have handed that over. So how would we approach that expectations and trust dance, Mark?
Mm. I mean, it's such a trap. And, you know, the old Indian proverb of if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, then go with the group, go with the team. And, you know, if you look at nature, it exemplifies that. I mean, you know, birds fly in flocks for a reason. You know, wolves travel in packs for a reason. You know, there's specific order and structure to that, and there's an appropriate time for every bird in that flight or flock to assume a certain position, which benefits themselves, but it also benefits others. But it doesn't wear them out, doesn't tire them out. They shift and they take on different positions. They are quite multitasking, and I think this is something to look at relative to our skills base. You know, we have a character traits that are, let's assume that we're not there to change character traits. We're not there to change people's values. We're there to work with those values and to allow them to be empowered to create actions that are going to be more useful for them. And in doing that, useful for the practice. So, you know, so the expectations that we have are not about, well, I just want you to do it my way. You know, that's sort of the hierarchical old school style of management. It's a hierarchical thing that the CEO is at the top, and then the COO, and then like different layers of names. You know, so it's like you look at government. It's a whole bunch of 3 or 4 letter initials that run a country very poorly. So, you know, that's not useful when it comes to interacting as a society, as a group, as you know, it's good control. And that way the person would just do what they've got to do based on the script that we give them. But there's a zero sum game in that. You know, there's not a lot of gain for the person. There's not a lot of gain for the delivery of it. So the expectation that we have of do it my way has to be challenged, and you know, has to be challenged by ourselves. Otherwise, people will challenge it with non-compliance. And so I think, you know, it's important to look at it from that position, because then it endures or creates trust within the person. The person, if they can get a win, they trust themselves more. If they are trying to, you know, measure up to someone else's expectations of them, they are always setting themselves up for failure, because that, you know, they won't be the same as that other person. And we see this, you know, with in practices with you know, the CA's been there for 10, 20 years, and they have a tendency to keep others down by virtue of doing it all themselves, or giving having expectations of the underlings to get it right the first time, or not at all. So I think, you know, there's got to be a tolerance for that development, just as a flock of birds would, push not as strong a bird to the front for a period of time, but not long, and then bring them back, and then the next one goes up. It may be stronger to act as a windbreak for everyone else behind, and to act that draft. So I think there's an awareness of where the person's at, what their philosophy is, being able to then design, in some cases, uh, the role for them, because roles aren't sort of one size fits all. That they have to be unique, as we use with the example of the recall systems. That has to be a different approach for every individual, and this is the great part about it, because then when they do, it becomes their own property, and they're doing something that sure is prescribed initially, but has become now blended to them, their expression, their way of interacting with others, with the public. So I think having that tolerance, which means examining our expectations, and with that we're building trust. Every time we chug for a win, then there's and if it's a win-win, right? And so if our expectation is, well, 80% would be great, then this is a 20%er. Fantastic. That means we get now it's closer to being 80%. So it becomes a win on both parts. And there can be some high fives, there can be a little bit of correction, and into it we go again. So I think that's the trust factor, because if we complete something based on what our outcomes were at the beginning, and we can make a success out of it, no matter what it is, it's always a success. Then and there's some fine tuning, then that allows us to have a win, to have more connection, and the trust factor goes up. So
Yeah.
in the parties.
And I think one of the things that I'd like to unpack, and we're if we think of three big chunks we get from today, I think this would probably be the third one. If the first one was shared values, the second one then was that expectations and trust game. You mentioned it quite briefly, but I'd like you to unpack this a little bit more for this, is the difference between a role and a responsibility. I'm not sure that many of our listeners would have ever been exposed to the difference between the roles versus responsibilities, and how they differ, and what's useful for us to play in that space.
Yeah. Okay. So a role is the doing, the responsibility is the accountability, right? So and it's on both sides. The role of the chiropractor or the CA who's giving some the role to someone else has a responsibility to communicate that. So has a responsibility to find out the best way that could be conveyed. So there is there's an answerable factor to that, and say there's a KPA, there's an action measurement there that is key, and it's relative to the performance. So it's something that the giver, if you like, of the role needs to be aware of. That it's not just about abrogating responsibility across to another person. It's delegating and defining and supporting and nurturing that role. So that then is a responsible position. Likewise, receiving a role has an element of responsibility there too. Is to firstly to get it, and everyone learns differently. So some people want to be told once and that's it. Other people want to have all the research and all the background and all the documentation, and then they're fine. And others want you to sit next to them and show them how it all goes together. I mean, and others can just be fired up with a whole bunch of ideas about how amazing it's going to be, and they perform the role really well. So it's not just one size fits all. Once again, so I think being able to move into those spaces of firstly responsibly giving a role and being accountable and giving accountability across as well. So it's two-way accountability. And for the receiver, it is say the accountability, but it's also being responsible for receiving the role, looking after the role, and identifying exceptions to the role. And this is I think a really important thing, because we have the the idea about it, the philosophy, we have all the information about it. We then perform the role. And then what role is absolutely cut and dry? I can't think of anything. I mean, even
No.
putting the rubbish out, putting the garbage out. I mean, it's not cut and dry. There's always going to be, whatever the paper, what if the plastic bag rips, or what if there's been a glass in the bottom of the bag, or what if this, what if that, what if that.
What if it's a public holiday and it's Christmas?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's, so having that responsibility there allows us to then start to create or reinvent the role, to innovate it, and maybe create a whole different system for that, which then feeds back to the storyboard, or to the center within the practice that deals with these things. So, I think that's what a responsible person would do if they're responsible for their role. Now, responsible doesn't have a value judgment; it's simply being able to respond to that role and to respond back. So that then allows them to be the creator and the owner of that role, and also the innovator of the next iteration of that role.
And I think that's such a subtle but powerful cue you just gave there, is for a person to be responsible for the role, they need to be able to respond to the role, able to respond to the role. That really does clarify that, at least for me, as I hear you say that, makes such a big difference. And then the difference between a key performance indicator you spoke about earlier and the key performance activity. The indicator is the output, is the outcome. The activity is the output, is what you're doing. So we're measuring it more by what and how the person's doing it, rather than only by the outcome that they're achieving. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, because it's chunking for success. You're not always in control of the outcome, but you are in control of your actions. So if we can be in a position with a person where, as an individual, where we are given a set of actions that are designed to get a certain outcome, and we do those actions absolutely the best we can, we could, and being open to critique on it, and we notice what we're getting, and maybe that's all that's needed to up the outcome, but it may not be. It may be that the structure that's been given to the person, the actions, are not appropriate for the outcome. So, it's such a frustrating thing for people to be saying this script and doing these things, and that the outcome doesn't change, and yet the person gets the blame. And I think, in most businesses, that the greatest breakdown is in the structure of the system rather than the individual. If the system should make individuals do things in a certain way, and if that's well defined, then that action step becomes quite consistent, and we know that we change the way that they're doing it, and that's going to change the outcome. Then it takes a lot of stress off the person who's performing the action. They know that if they say these things in this way, or with this tone, or whatever it happens to be, that they will get a certain outcome. And then they can play with that, they can tweak it, and they've got much more responsibility on their shoulders with that. Not that it's a burden; it's a lightning, if anything.
Yeah, they're able to respond more. And then this last distinction here of the systems versus the person, or it's not even a versus, but when things are going right or when things aren't going as we had planned, is scrutinizing the system again and again and again, so that we're not scrutinizing the person. And there's some people who are good fits for places and not. Let's take that one off the table for now. But the emphasis so often in these places is to lay blame at the person. Now, we're not really looking for blame. We're looking to be curious about what didn't quite go the way we planned. And so often it comes down to either not a fully formed system, or a fully formed system that wasn't handed over well, or a fully formed system that's old and out of date that needs some revision. And if a person is driving a system that's inappropriate, we're always going to get an outcome that we're not looking for, a suboptimal outcome from that.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it becomes far more person friendly. It frees people up. to be themselves and to express themselves.
And that allows them to participate in the shared philosophy. They feel comfortable in the outcome so that they gain their own trust in themselves, which allows them to take on the role and to then do the responsibility part so much better. So, like, I think those are four beautiful chunks for us to take away from this conversation now. If you had to look at this overall, this concept of being able to delegate and hand over, if it's done beautifully, where does this take us? What's the possibility for chiropractors and teams listening to this when delegation is done in using these four concepts we've gone through today of shared values, clear expectations, roles and responsibilities, and system versus individual? Where does this go, Mark?
Well, you've just described the four components of the brain in order, which is a useful place to start because we do create our outcomes by virtue of that, our internal processing. So I think each of those are a package that allows us then to evolve. We can go into a higher level of order, and so as a chiro, one of our opportunities here is to evolve and scale ourselves. We're going up into higher levels of complexity with the simplicity of a model that then allows us to connect to a greater output or greater impact or greater contribution. So I think, there's a lot in it for us to do that. And, there's also there's the components of what is it that soothes your soul, and, for some high level chiros, it may be to be there and open up the practice before anyone else in the morning. Don't have to, but they just love it. They love and they're welcome here. Maybe they're not even on until the afternoon shift, or maybe they're not on at all. But so there's an ownership there that is something that is soothes the soul. In terms of a strategy for this, I think being able to take time away from the practice to then observe what breaks. And it's like spinning tops. Or plates. You go around and you spin them and you set them going, and then you go back and you check and see which ones are wobbly. And you go another spin and off they go again. So I think that's been my experience anyway of making sure they have nice long breaks during the year. Get away and observe what's happening when we come back. Notice, for example, you're away for a month or so. Do you get any SOSs or maydays or please helps from the practice? One of your KPIs could be how many phone calls do you get? How many emails do you have to answer that has to do with the functioning of the practice on a daily basis? So, there are measurements there because I would see that as a really useful tool for chiros to create leverage in their business. Because in many cases, you just have to, if you're going to go away for a month or two, a week or two, nothing. But, that's not a real get away. That's just, sort of transfer your people across, transfer the responsibilities across. Anything that's going to break and affect the place probably won't have much impact within a couple of weeks. But if it's a month or two, that's a different proposition. So I think being able to do that, being able to take 30,000 foot view to look at it in terms of how the system's running, how simple can we make them, but no simpler, so that we can then have as we term it, an associate-driven practice. That could be one of the teams. I mean, one of the goals. I mean, it could be that you have one CA, and that could be a CA-driven practice. And that in that case, you'd actually bring a locum in, and the CA would run the show, and the locum would produce well, and you can go off and do whatever you need to do, and you don't expect to hear from the CA for 2 months. Right, so that could well be another model. But I think we just have to look at ourselves and say, okay, what is our our outcome in this area? Is it to have the opportunity to scale, to leverage, in which case, okay, we need to have other people on the job. But before we do that, we're going to have systems on the job. So get the systems in place, and plug people into the systems, empower the people in the systems, so then the people can run the systems, and the systems run the people, and the systems and the people run the practice.
Beautiful. Sounds like a great place to be, where we can have freedom from having to be at the adjusting table, so we can love being at the adjusting table more. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up for this today, Mark. That was lots of wisdom imparted. I'll come back to those four parts to go back through again. Is make sure we're playing from shared values, clear communications, have roles and responsibilities defined with the key performance activities, and then make sure that we have systems that are well defined so that the individuals can function fully within them. Mark, thank you so much for your time with us today. Fun having you, and I know we're going to have you back soon again.
You're welcome, Greg. Pleasure. See ya. Thank you.